The night was unusually quiet in the small city of Brookshire. Judge Selina Ellis, a respected African-American woman in her early 40s, was driving home from a late community meeting. She wore plain clothes, jeans, a blazer, and her natural hair tied neatly in coils. To the outside eye, she didn't look like the presiding judge of the county's superior court. She looked like any other black woman on the road. As she turned onto a dimly lit street, flashing red and blue lights suddenly appeared in her rearview mirror. She sighed, pulling her car to the curb. She hadn't been speeding, nor had she run a light. Still, she lowered her window when two officers approached. "License and registration," one demanded curtly. His partner's flashlight swept across her face, lingering on her hair with thinly veiled disdain. Selina calmly handed over her documents. "Is there a reason I'm being stopped?" she asked politely. The officers exchanged a smirk. "You match a description," one muttered vaguely. Her stomach tightened. She knew the drill: vague accusations, intimidation, the subtle way authority sometimes morphed into abuse when prejudice led the charge. Still, she kept her tone even. "Description of what, officer?" Instead of answering, one of them motioned for her to step out of the vehicle. Confused but compliant, Selina obeyed. Within moments, things escalated. They searched her without cause, mocking her as they did. Then, shockingly, one pulled out a pair of clippers from their cruiser. "What's this about?" she demanded, panic breaking through her composure. "Just cleaning you up," one sneered, gripping her arm. Before she could protest further, the clippers buzzed to life. With a cruel laugh, they began shaving her hair right there on the roadside, unaware that the woman they humiliated was the very judge who would soon preside over their fate. The cold night air cut against Selina's skin as strands of her hair fell to the asphalt. Her heart raced, not just from fear, but from the crushing weight of humiliation. Each buzzing stroke of the clippers felt like an attack not only on her body, but on her identity, her dignity, and the years she had spent commanding respect in a courtroom. "Hold still," one officer barked, pressing her shoulder as if she were some criminal refusing to cooperate. Selina clenched her jaw, refusing to let tears fall. She would not give them that victory. She had faced hardened criminals, vicious attorneys, and tense courtrooms filled with hostility. Yet nothing had prepared her for this, a roadside stripping of her humanity at the hands of men sworn to protect it. When the last patch of hair was gone, one officer chuckled. "Much better. Now you don't look so high and mighty." They tossed her driver's license back at her carelessly and muttered something about being free to go. Without explanation, without citation, they simply walked back to their cruiser, laughing. Selina sat behind the wheel, staring at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her scalp was unevenly shaved, patches of her natural coils still clinging stubbornly against the cruel handiwork. Her chest tightened. The law had always been her shield, her robe a symbol of fairness, her gavel a weapon of justice. But tonight, those protections had been stripped away by men who didn't know and didn't care who she was. Yet beneath the pain, a fire began to kindle. These officers thought they had broken her. They thought they had reduced her to shame. But Selina Ellis was no ordinary woman, and very soon she would remind them exactly who she was. The next morning, sunlight crept through Selina's curtains, but she barely slept. Each time she closed her eyes, she heard the buzz of clippers, the mocking laughter, the sting of helplessness. She had handled countless cases of police misconduct before, listening to stories from defendants who described moments that seemed unbelievable, until now. Selina walked to her bathroom mirror, wrapping a scarf around her freshly shaved head. The reflection staring back was foreign, stripped, raw, and yet strangely fierce. For a brief moment she allowed herself to cry, not from weakness, but from the insult of injustice. She knew tears were not a sign of defeat, they were fuel. Her phone buzzed. It was her clerk, reminding her of the docket for the afternoon. Selina took a deep breath, straightened her blazer, and tied the scarf tighter. Court didn't wait for anyone, not even judges who had been humiliated the night before. She arrived at the courthouse, her presence commanding respect as always. Colleagues noticed the scarf but asked no questions. Her reputation for discipline and composure kept them silent. Selina kept her head high, concealing the storm brewing inside her. As she sat in chambers, reviewing case files, the clerk knocked and entered. "Judge Ellis," he said cautiously, "today's arraignment has some unusual names on the list." Selina raised a brow. "Unusual how?" The clerk hesitated. "Two officers, charged with excessive force and misconduct, arrested late last night after a complaint was filed." Selina's pulse quickened. Their names? He handed her the papers. She read them once. Then again. Her hands tightened around the file. It was them, the very officers who had shaved her head just hours ago. Fate, it seemed, had delivered them directly into her courtroom. The courtroom buzzed with chatter as people shuffled in for the afternoon session. Reporters had caught wind of the overnight arrests, their cameras flashing as the two officers were escorted inside in handcuffs. They looked less smug now, their uniforms traded for orange jumpsuits, but their arrogance still clung to them like a second skin. Selina sat behind the bench, her black robe draped neatly over her frame. The scarf still covered her head, but her posture radiated authority. Her gavel struck once, and the room silenced instantly. "Court is now in session," she announced, her voice steady, commanding. The defense attorney for the officers stood quickly. "Your Honor, my clients, Officers Harris and Doyle, request leniency. The charges brought against them are exaggerated and politically motivated." Selina's eyes flickered to the men at the table. Harris avoided her gaze. Doyle smirked, as if still convinced this was all a misunderstanding that would soon disappear. "Bring the defendants forward," Selina instructed. The bailiff led them to the front. For the first time, Harris looked directly at her and froze, his face drained of color. Doyle's smirk faltered. Selina let the silence stretch, her eyes fixed firmly on theirs. Slowly, deliberately, she removed the scarf from her head. The courtroom gasped. Underneath, her scalp bore the uneven patches of their cruelty, still fresh and undeniable. Whispers rippled through the gallery. The realization spread like wildfire. "These men," Selina said, her voice sharp as steel, "stand accused of abuse of power, and now the court knows firsthand what that abuse looks like." The officers shifted uneasily, their confidence collapsing in real time. For the first time since that night, Selina felt power returning, not through vengeance, but through justice. The courtroom trembled with tension. Everyone's eyes were locked on Judge Selina Ellis, her exposed scalp a living testament to what had been done to her. The two officers fidgeted under the weight of the room's judgment, their arrogance visibly crumbling. The defense attorney cleared his throat, struggling to regain control. "Your Honor," he began, voice wavering, "while the court's respect for your position is undeniable, it is possible this matter has become personal. Perhaps another judge." Selina's gavel cracked against the wood. "Order," she commanded. "You will proceed with your arguments, Counselor. The facts, not excuses." Harris, the taller of the two officers, stepped forward angrily. "This is ridiculous. We didn't know she was—" He cut himself off, realizing too late what he was about to admit. The gallery erupted in murmurs. Reporters scribbled furiously. Selina's sharp gaze locked onto him. "Didn't know I was what, Officer Harris?" He faltered, sweat beading on his forehead. His partner, Doyle, muttered under his breath, "She's setting us up." Selina leaned forward. "No, gentlemen. You set yourselves up the moment you abused your authority. This court doesn't care who the victim is. What matters is that you violated the law you swore to uphold." The prosecutor rose, seizing the moment. "Your Honor, the state will present evidence, including eyewitness testimony, dashcam recordings, and physical proof of the assault. The officers' actions were not only unlawful, they were degrading." Gasps filled the room. Dashcam footage, eyewitnesses. The officers exchanged panicked glances. What they thought was hidden in the darkness of that street was about to play out under the unblinking light of justice. Selina's heart pounded, but her face remained composed. This was no longer just her fight. It was a trial for truth as the prosecutor approached the bench with a folder in hand. "Your Honor, the state would like to introduce Exhibit A, body cam and dash cam footage recovered from the defendant's cruiser." The courtroom stirred. Everyone knew how damning those recordings could be. Selina gave a firm nod. "Proceed." The bailiff wheeled in a monitor, and soon the screen flickered to life. Grainy footage appeared, the flashing patrol lights. Selina's car pulled to the curb, her calm voice asking why she was stopped. The jury, the gallery, and even the reporters leaned forward, captivated. Then came the moment. The officers dragging her from the car, their mocking laughter, the buzzing of clippers, the humiliation captured frame by frame with chilling clarity. Selina's scarfed head dipped slightly as the sound filled the courtroom, but she forced herself to watch. When the video ended, silence blanketed the room. It wasn't just silence, it was collective outrage. The prosecutor's voice cut through the tension. The evidence speaks for itself. Abuse of power, assault, humiliation. These are not the actions of officers sworn to protect. These are crimes. The defense attorney scrambled. "Your Honor, surely context." "Context?" Selina's voice was razor-sharp. Tell me, Counselor, what context justifies shaving a woman's head on the side of the road? What context excuses mockery and assault under the guise of law enforcement? The attorney shrank back. Reporters scribbled furiously, some whispering into recorders. The story was already spreading beyond the courtroom walls. The officers sat rigid, their earlier confidence now replaced with fear. Harris gritted his teeth. Doyle stared at the floor. Selina inhaled slowly, regaining composure. Justice wasn't about vengeance, it was about accountability. And now the world had seen what they had done. The courtroom buzzed with whispers long after the footage ended. Reporters texted frantically, cameras clicked, and even the jury looked shaken. The humiliation of Judge Selina Ellis was no longer just her private nightmare, it was public knowledge. Selina struck her gavel. Order in the court. Her voice carried authority, though deep inside she could feel her pulse racing. The prosecutor rose again. Your Honor, Exhibit B, an eyewitness testimony, a passerby who recorded portions of the incident on their phone. Gasps rippled across the room. The defense attorney slammed his folder shut. This is outrageous. Your clients will remain silent until it is their turn to testify, Selina cut in, her tone firm. The bailiff escorted a young woman forward. She was nervous, clutching her phone tightly. State your name for the record, the prosecutor said. Maria Torres, she whispered. Maria's video was played next. The angle was shaky, filmed from across the street, but clear enough to show the clippers buzzing and Selina struggling to remain composed as the officers jeered. The gallery recoiled at the cruelty. When the video ended, Maria's voice trembled. I didn't know who she was that night. I just knew it was wrong. I had to record it. Selina looked at the young woman, her eyes softening. Your courage to speak the truth is noted, she said quietly. The officers' faces paled. Doyle muttered under his breath, We're finished. Harris glared at him, but the fear in his eyes betrayed the truth. The tide had shifted. What was once arrogance and power now dissolved into panic and dread. For the first time, Selina sensed not just justice approaching, but redemption for every unheard voice silenced by abuse. The prosecutor rested his case, and now all eyes turned to the defense table. The judge's gaze never wavered as the attorney rose nervously. Your Honor, the defense calls Officer Harris to the stand. Harris strutted forward, though his earlier arrogance had thinned into strained bravado. He raised his hand, took the oath, and sat down stiffly. Officer Harris, the defense attorney began, can you explain your actions that evening? Harris leaned toward the microphone. It was a mistake. We thought she matched a suspect's description. Things escalated, but we didn't mean any real harm. The courtroom erupted with murmurs. Selina tapped her gavel. Proceed. The prosecutor stood for cross-examination. Officer Harris, did this suspect description include an African-American woman in business attire, driving a sedan registered under her own name? Harris stammered. Well, no, but did it include shaving someone's head on the roadside? Harris's face flushed. That was just a joke that went too far. The gallery gasped. A joke, the prosecutor repeated coldly. Tell me, Officer Harris, does your oath allow you to joke by humiliating civilians, or is it to protect and serve them? Harris shifted uncomfortably. His silence was damning. When Doyle was called next, his demeanor was less confident. He avoided Selina's eyes entirely. I just went along, he muttered. I didn't want to, but Harris pushed me into it. Selina's expression hardened. You are both sworn officers. Cowardice is no excuse for cruelty. The defense attorney tried to object, but the damage was done. The jury's faces were stone, unmoved by excuses. By the time Doyle left the stand, it was clear their testimonies had only dug them deeper into guilt. The jurors sat stiffly, their expressions grim after hearing the officers' stumbling testimonies. They exchanged uneasy glances, some shaking their heads. The defense had hoped for sympathy, but instead, the officers had revealed themselves as reckless, arrogant, and unrepentant. Selina studied the jury silently, her face unreadable. But inside, she could sense the weight shifting further against the defendants. Justice was no longer a question. It was inevitable. The prosecutor stood, his voice deliberate. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have heard their own words. Officer Harris called this humiliation a joke. Officer Doyle claimed he merely followed orders. But justice is not a matter of jokes. Justice is not optional. Abuse of power is abuse, no matter how they dress it. He let the words hang in the air before continuing. These men thought they could act without consequence. But the law is clear. No one is above accountability, not even those who wear the badge. The jury nodded subtly, some scribbling notes. The gallery erupted in hushed whispers, reporters whispering into microphones. The defense attorney made one last attempt, his voice rising with desperation. My clients are decorated officers. They've risked their lives for this community. Should one mistake erase years of service? Selina's gavel struck sharply. Enough. The jury will decide based on facts, not sentiment. The tension thickened. Everyone could feel it. The trial had turned from a legal proceeding into a defining moment for the entire city. Selina's scalp still itched where the clippers had cut unevenly, but now, instead of shame, she felt a fierce pride. She hadn't been broken. Her dignity, though scarred, was intact. And soon, the jury would decide whether justice would fully prevail. The final day of the trial arrived, and the courthouse was packed beyond capacity. People lined the halls, reporters camped outside, and camera crews broadcast every update. The case of State versus Harrison Doyle had become more than a trial. It was a reckoning. Selina entered the courtroom with her robe flowing behind her, her head uncovered this time. She had chosen not to hide the evidence of her humiliation. Instead, she wore it as truth, a reminder that even judges could be victims, and even victims could demand justice. The prosecutor delivered closing arguments with precision. The law is not a shield for cruelty, it is a promise of fairness. Officers Harris and Doyle broke that promise in the most degrading way possible. If the law means anything, it must mean accountability. The defense attorney, weary and pale, stood for the last time. My clients admit mistakes. But prison? For a lapse in judgment? They've already been shamed, publicly. Surely that is punishment enough. The jury's faces remained impassive. The arguments no longer swayed them. Their minds were nearly made. Selina instructed the bailiff. The jury will retire to deliberate. The room exhaled collectively as the jurors filed out. The wait began. Hours ticked by, tension stretching like a wire ready to snap. Selina sat in chambers, staring at the ceiling. She thought of every defendant who had ever stood before her, begging for fairness. She thought of Maria Torres, the brave witness. She thought of countless nameless people who had faced abuses like hers, without cameras, without trials, without justice. When the knock finally came, the bailiff's voice was steady. Your Honor, the jury has reached a verdict. Selina rose. The moment had come. The courtroom was silent as the jury filed back into their seats. The air was thick with anticipation, every breath held. Selina's gavel struck once. Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict? The foreperson, a middle-aged woman with firm eyes, stood. We have, Your Honor. Selina nodded. Please read the verdict. The foreperson unfolded the paper, her voice clear. On the charge of abuse of authority under colour of law, we find the defendants guilty. On the charge of assault, we find the defendants guilty. On the charge of misconduct unbecoming of an officer, we find the defendants guilty. The room erupted. Reporters scrambled, jurors exhaled in relief, and members of the gallery clapped before being silenced by the gavel. Harris slumped in his chair, his jaw tight with fury. Doyle buried his face in his hands. Selina's gaze swept the courtroom, finally resting on the two officers. This court upholds the law, not the illusion of power. When officers betray their oath, they betray the community they swore to serve. Justice has spoken. Harris glared at her, his voice bitter. This is revenge. Selina leaned forward, her tone measured. This is accountability. If this were about revenge, I would have remained silent. Instead, I chose the law, and the law has found you guilty. The defense attorney tried to protest, but the judge's gavel silenced him. Sentencing will be scheduled. Until then, the defendants are remanded into custody. The bailiff stepped forward, cuffing the two men, as cameras flashed wildly. As the courtroom emptied, Selina sat back for a moment, breathing deeply. Justice had not erased the pain of that night, but it had transformed humiliation into power, and the world had witnessed it all. 2 weeks later, the courthouse was filled once more. The trial had gripped the city, and now everyone waited to hear the sentence that would define its legacy. Outside, crowds held signs, some demanding justice, others calling for reform within the police force. Selina entered the courtroom, her robe flowing, her head uncovered with quiet pride. She no longer felt the sting of humiliation when people saw her shaved scalp. It had become a symbol, one of survival, strength, and truth. The bailiff announced the defendants, and Harris and Doyle were led in. Their earlier bravado was gone. Their faces were pale, their eyes hollow. The weight of their guilty verdict hung heavy. Selina's voice rang out. "This court is tasked with delivering not just punishment, but precedent. Officers Harris and Doyle, you were entrusted with the sacred responsibility of protecting this community. Instead, you abused your authority, degraded a citizen, and dishonored your oath." She paused, letting silence fill the chamber. The law allows for mercy when there is remorse, but this court has seen little of either. Therefore, it is the sentence of this court that each of you serve 10 years in state prison with no possibility of parole for the first 5. The gallery gasped. Some clapped, others whispered, but all understood the weight of her decision. Harris muttered curses under his breath as he was escorted out. Doyle stumbled, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Selina struck her gavel once. "Court is adjourned." As she rose, reporters shouted questions, but Selina ignored them, walking with steady dignity. This was never about the cameras, never about the headlines. It was about proving one truth: even when power is abused, justice can still prevail. The sentencing made national headlines within hours. News anchors debated the significance of a judge presiding over her own case, while legal scholars praised Selina's restraint and commitment to fairness. For many, the image of her standing proudly in court with her shaved head had become a symbol of courage against corruption. In Brookshire, the atmosphere shifted. Community members who had long feared speaking out against police misconduct suddenly found their voices. Complaints poured in, investigations reopened, and reforms were demanded. What happened to Selina was no longer seen as an isolated incident. It was the spark of a broader movement. Selina, however, returned quietly to her duties. Each morning she walked into her courtroom as she always had, firm and composed. But there was a new depth in the way people looked at her. Defendants, attorneys, even jurors seemed to carry an extra measure of respect. Maria Torres, the young woman who had testified, stopped by her chambers one afternoon. "Judge Ellis," she said softly, "I just wanted to thank you. Seeing you stand strong, it gave me hope. For me, for others like me." Selina smiled warmly, resting a hand on Maria's shoulder. "It was your courage that brought the truth forward. Never forget that." Outside, crowds continued to chant her name. Some called her a hero, others called her the voice of justice, but Selina never let it reach her head. Late that night, alone in her home, she stood before the mirror once again. Her hair was beginning to grow back, small curls forming. She touched them lightly, her reflection no longer foreign. The woman staring back was not broken. She was stronger than ever, scarred, yes, but unshakable. And she knew her fight had only just begun. Months passed, but the echoes of that trial never faded. Across the nation, Selina Ellis's story became a rallying cry. Colleges invited her to speak about justice, churches praised her resilience, and civil rights groups honored her as a living example of integrity under fire. Yet Selina never sought the spotlight. She stayed in her courtroom, where her gavel still struck with steady authority. Her legacy, she knew, was not built on fame. It was built on the decisions she made each day, the fairness she upheld, and the dignity she demanded for every soul who stood before her. Police reform bills began surfacing in the state legislature, inspired by her case. Training programs were revised, oversight committees strengthened. For the first time in years, accountability no longer felt like a distant dream. But Selina also knew the fight was far from over. Opponents called her biased, claimed she'd set a dangerous precedent. Threats arrived in her inbox. Some tried to reduce her to the victim of a single night, ignoring the decades she had built her career on. She refused to bend. "Justice is not comfort," she told a journalist once. "It is courage, and courage demands sacrifice." One evening, as she left the courthouse, she paused on the steps. The setting sun painted the city in gold. A small crowd gathered, cheering softly. Among them were young girls with natural hair, holding signs that read, "Strength looks like you." Selina smiled, touched but resolute. The night of her humiliation no longer defined her. The trial had not destroyed her, it had revealed her strength. As the gavel of history struck, Judge Selina Ellis knew her name would not be remembered for what was taken from her, but for the justice she gave back.